I don't really see that the social media drives curiosity.
What to you is diet culture? What does it actually look like through your lenses?
How would you define it?
I would say it's pressure from the culture to disregard your own body's wisdom.
Before we dive into today's episode, just a quick trigger warning that we do touch on topics such as eating disorders and disordered eating. If you are feeling vulnerable, make sure that you reach out to your local mental health care practitioner or visit the Butterfly Foundation for support.
Hey, I'm Zeb,
And I'm Maddie.
and welcome to the We Don't Know Yet podcast. Whilst both Maddie and I are healthcare practitioners, we understand that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare. Should you require any medical attention, please seek out your local healthcare practitioner.
Welcome back to the We Don't Know Yet podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest. We are joined by Dr. Anita Johnston, all the way in Colorado, USA. Dr. Anita Johnston is a clinical psychologist and a certified eating disorder specialist with over 35 years of experience. She is the author of the best-selling book Eating in the Light of the Moon and the co-creator of the Light of the Moon Cafe, a series of online interactive courses and women's support circles and soul hunger workshops. She is also currently the clinical director of iPorno in Hawaii, an eating disorder program with residential treatment programs in Maui. And she harnesses the power of storytelling to aid in the healing progress. And she harnesses the power of storytelling. Oh my goodness, my words aren't wedding. And she harnesses the power of storytelling to aid in the healing process. Dr. Johnston, welcome. We are so honored to have you on today.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
pleased to be here.
And 6 p.m. you just told us over there. So you're sitting down for dinner while we're kind of waking up and just getting started for the day over here.
That's how the world turns,
Hey,
right?
it is.
Oh goodness. And we had a bit of a conversation off air about how hard it actually still is in this day and age to navigate daylight savings. Like you
Yeah.
think you can just quickly Google it, but inevitably something will go wrong. But yeah, we're very, very fortunate to have you on today.
Yeah, yeah, and me as well personally. I feel like I'm so excited to find out a little bit more about you and what your kind of experience of 35 years actually looks like. So maybe if you don't mind, would you kind of take us back to where it all kind of began for you in this journey?
Ooh, that's far back.
Chills.
Well, uh, well, I'm originally from Guam. I was born and raised there and grew up in indigenous household where there was a lot of storytelling. And I was always just fascinated by the different cultural aspects. And so when I went to become a psychologist, I was studying, just trying to make sense out of everything, and ended up in Hawaii, where I was supervising a psychology intern who was doing her doctoral dissertation on the incidence of eating disorders in Hawaii. And back then, I mean, I'm talking, this is early 1980, 81, 82. And there was very little that was known in those days. I mean, Karen Carpenter had just been diagnosed and then she died from anorexia. So people knew about anorexia. Bulimia was just starting to be understood. People didn't know what binge eating was. I mean, there was very, very little. And so she and I and another woman, we got together and we started talking about the incidents we were seeing of folks struggling with eating disorders in Hawaii. And after we said it, for about the fifth time, we said, oh my gosh, there should be a center here. There's so many people that are struggling. And it was one of those things where you create it and they come. And so that's when I started just trying to figure out what in the world is going on. Why are so many people struggling with food and eating and their bodies?
We'd like to take a break from today's episode to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Drip Digital. They manage all of our audio and video editing as well as our social media marketing. Without them, the We Don't Know Yet podcast wouldn't be possible. So thank you again.
And I feel like that speaks really nicely to kind of like our whole podcast mission. But like, like it's just a little bit of evidence in such a long span of history that, we don't always know what's going on until someone kind of speaks up and says something and asks a question. And then all of a sudden, we start to look into it a little bit further and uncover some different things. But as well, like societal norms change over time. So I can imagine, like in your experience working in this field, you would have seen so many differences in terms of how society is viewed and what predisposes people to a lot of these kind of conditions as well.
Yeah, I think because I didn't grow up in diet culture. So on the island of Guam when I was growing up, and at first I thought maybe I just don't remember it right. But I asked my girlfriend, we've been best friends growing up, and I said, "Yeah, do you remember, did our mothers diet?" And she said, "No, nobody dieted then."
Mm.
So that's the reason why I think I probably didn't have an eating disorder, because I certainly have the personality. So I think I just kind of slid under the radar on that one. So I've seen this development of dieting culture that has it's been a really curious thing to me.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
don't grow up in it, you can start to look at it and go, "What is that?"
Yeah, and I think we all have like a bit of a general perception of what the terms diet culture actually means. But like, what to you is diet culture? What does it actually look like through your lenses?
How would you define it?
Well, I would say it's pressure from the culture to disregard your own body's wisdom.
Mm.
The idea that somebody out there knows better than you what you should be eating and how much and when and blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
rather than a person learning to identify their own internal mechanisms, the sensations of their body that can communicate a lot of information, but we've been taught not to listen. We've been taught to disregard it. And so for me, that's what diet culture is.
I love that you define it that way because it is so ridiculous when you put it like in such a way as you explained. Like, our body is the expert in what, when, and how much food we need. And to sort of tune out of that and listen to this external stimulus that thinks it's the expert, it's just so foreign when you explain it like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and it can lead to so many problems. Not, certainly there's eating disorders, but there's also, this idea that we all have to be the same. And so if you're not listening to the unique messages from your body, you may very easily be eating in ways that aren't right for your particular body.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's okay, I'd like to sort of just take us back a little bit before we dive into that, because I do feel like obviously the bulk of today's episode is going to be covering diet culture and your expertise in that area. I'm really interested to know what got you into psychology in the first place, if you're open to sharing.
Oh, well, again, growing up in a multicultural household and noticing that what was okay in one culture wasn't okay in another,
Mhm.
I began to be really fascinated by that. And I also, the Chamorro culture is matrilineal. And so, um, really starting to look at women's roles in that cultural sense, I was fascinated by that because I was seeing a lot of discrepancies between the different cultures and the way that I was raised. So I think from the time I was little, in fact, I got together with a friend that we were best friends since we were like 3 years old, and I haven't seen each other and for many years. And we were talking, and she said, "Do you remember what you said when we were little and we talked about what we wanted to be when we grew up?" And I went, "Of course not, right?
No.
Who remembers that?" She said, "Well, I do. I remember what you said." And I said, "What did I say?" And she said, "You said you want to be a brain doctor because you want to see what's going on inside people's heads." I said that?
Oh my
She said,
goodness.
"Yes, you did." And she said, "I remember the look in your eye when you said that." And I was like, "Okay." So I don't remember, but I'm imagining as far back then, I was just very curious. And then when I was in graduate school, my first professor, I didn't know who he was. I was pretty naive. I just walked into the room, and here's this little old man, and he's talking in a strong accent, and I'm trying to understand. And it turned out to be Viktor Frankl, who wrote probably one of the most profound books of the century called Man's Search for Meaning.
Mhm.
He was a psychiatrist who wrote about his experience in the Nazi prison camps during World War II,
Wow.
where he lost everything, his wife, his parents, everything. And what he wrote about was that you could be stripped of everything that you've ever held dear, but there is one thing that could never, ever, ever be taken away from you. And that was the meaning you gave to your experience.
Mm.
And therein was your freedom. And that struck me so powerfully, so that when I started working in the field of disordered eating, I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to know, what does it mean and what's the meaning?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think it's really important to acknowledge that because there is this stigma around eating disorders and disordered eating that it's a choice and it's a cry for attention. And obviously, all of those things that I so heavily disagree with, like more often than not, it's, as I'm sure you know, it's a coping mechanism or there is this underlying function of an eating disorder. And I'm very curious, like yourself, in that it's really interesting to hear people's stories and hear how the eating disorder has come about and what purpose it is serving in their lives.
I think that's the most important thing, actually, to recognize that it serves a function, a very important function. And this is going back to diet mentality. First off, weight loss diets don't work.
Yeah.
There's been tons of studies that show that, and unfortunately, people still don't get it yet. But one of the reasons why they don't work is that they're not addressing why someone would be doing whatever it is they're doing with food in the first place.
Yes.
So you just remove the behaviors without any understanding of what's driving someone to do what they're doing. Of course it's going to come back. It's sort of like a weed. If you cut it off at the top, given the right circumstances, it's going to come right back. But if you can go down and get the roots, then it's a done deal. You can clear it.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting because I think it's something that the more questions we ask in today's healthcare in general, the more we find, even from, looking at like a musculoskeletal perspective, or, a lot of the
Mhm,
time we have these quick fixes that we try and quickly implement to deal with the
mhm.
symptom or what's going on. But
Alleviate the pain.
yeah, but we don't actually kind of ask the question of, well, why is this actually coming about? What's actually happening? And how do we unpack that further so that we can get to the root cause and deal with the actual problem at hand? So,
Yeah. Without going down.
Exactly. Mhm.
Yeah. And look, without going down too much of a rabbit hole, I feel like it's quite prominent in this day and age in like the way of Ozempic and other sort of similar medications whose names I'm not even going to go into, but it's treating the surface level problem, quote unquote. Not that I think at all it's a problem, but it's not addressing, as you said, the root. It's not addressing why someone eats that way or what someone's relationship with food and their body is looking like, which is very
Mhm.
problematic.
Right, and I think the reason why that's important, though, is if you can get to the root issue, you can clear it.
Yeah.
mm,
And so why wouldn't you want to be curious? But as you had mentioned earlier, what gets in the way is all the judgment.
Yes.
And so really summoning as much curiosity as you can muster is really the ticket out.
Absolutely. And I think holding that non-judgmental space for the people that you work with would be rather so invaluable because as you said, like they do face so much judgment and so much stigma and shame around, what's going on for them in their lives. So to have that space where you can explore and, get to the root cause together would just be so special.
Mhm.
I'm
Well,
curious.
one of
I'm curious, really quickly, to get your take on what you think. Social media, online kind of aspects have contributed to people unpacking things a lot further these days. I know there's a big spectrum. We've spoken about this over the last few weeks, in a sense that there's positive effects and negative effects. But do you find that people ask a lot more questions now, or they kind of look to dive a little bit deeper because of the fact that they're seeing so many different things online or in these spaces now where they kind of have a platform to ask, or have a little bit of information to actually ask that question to you when they come in and see you?
Actually, no.
Yeah.
I don't really see that the social media drives curiosity.
Yep.
I think it drives a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
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 So I think there's a lot of information about there in terms of the facts, and what are the statistics, but I think as far as someone really appreciating the paradox,
Yep.
because it's complicated. For example, disordered eating is about food because it's disordered eating, but it's also not about food.
Mm.
And so the not about food is the piece that I think people don't get very curious about, and people don't put out there on social media.
Yeah, yeah, because it's the not clickbaity stuff, right? You know, it's not the stuff that
Mhm.
people really want to explore too much in that
Get
social
likes.
platform. Yeah, it's the stuff that, like you said, you know, has that judgment or that stigma attached to it in the public eye that, you know, they hide away from and don't actually talk about in those spaces, I suppose, isn't it?
And also, I think part of the problem is that we live in a modern Western culture that is very literal, that
Mm,
takes everything so literally.
Yes.
mm,
And so they can't see the invisible forces, for example, that drive the disordered eating, like things like emotions, like things like intuitions.
mm,
And folks, in my experience, people that have struggled with disordered eating are very emotionally sensitive and highly intuitive individuals. But here we are in a culture that, first of all, doesn't teach you how to be a thin-skinned person in a thick-skinned world, right? You just
mm,
got to get over it. Nobody teaches you how to maneuver in that way. And things like intuition are just laughed at. So, what is someone to do with all of that?
mm,
And the folks I work with, what they have found is that putting their focus and their attention into counting calories or fat grams or whatever, then they don't have to deal with the confusion and the pain of feeling sort of like a misfit in a world that doesn't recognize the qualities that they have as attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest.
mm.
So, Dr. Johnson or Anita, what do you prefer?
Oh,
Either or.
my hat will turn at anything. You
Um,
can call me Anita.
Thank you, thank you. Well, Anita, you mentioned earlier that you grew up on the island of Guam, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, an island on the in the Micronesia, off the coast of Micronesia.
Right, it's in so if
In
you
Micronesia.
take a line and you draw go up from New Guinea to Japan,
Mhm.
and then you draw a line between the Philippines and Hawaii
Yep.
at the intersection. That's pretty much where Guam
Oh
is.
Right.
wow, wow, and it's quite small. We looked it up earlier, and it doesn't look like a big island.
It's 30 miles long and from 4 to 10 miles wide. So you can imagine I lived there. I did my first 2 years of college there. I couldn't wait to get off that
Oh
island.
my
Much
goodness.
as I love it, it's home, but yeah,
Well,
I
when
was
you
ready
grow up.
to see the world.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. When you grow up anywhere, I think you're really keen to
Yeah.
get out of your
Yeah.
hometown or your home island in your case. But from what I rather, and Zeb and I have sort of done a bit of research prior to today's episode, we have noticed that you really do use the power of storytelling in the work that you do. And I mentioned in my email to you quite some weeks ago that I actually often show my clients that the log video of yours, which I think
Ah,
is such a fantastic video that really perfectly encapsulates the eating disorder recovery experience. So, but yeah, I'm really interested, or Zeb and I are really interested just to hear about how you came about using your upbringing and sort of your cultural identity, particularly around the storytelling and translating that into the work that you do.
mm. Well, again, I grew up with storytelling. They were teaching tools, right? That's how we learn things. But then I think when I really put it together is when I had a private practice in Hawaii, and my daughters were going to Waldorf school, which you guys call Steiner schools,
Oh,
Yeah,
right?
yep,
yep.
yep, yeah.
Right. And so everything there is taught in story form. So they would come home from school and they would say, "Oh, today we learned about Prince division and Prince multiplication, and they did blah, blah, blah." And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I had learned my times tables that way, I would probably know them by now. And started realizing that you can take some very complex concepts and put them into story, and they're easily assimilated. And it's sort of like the metaphor that I had been told is if you put a sponge in a cup of ice, nothing's going to happen much. But if you melt that ice, then the sponge can absorb it. And
Ah,
so that's sort of what stories do. When I first started using them with my clients, I had the experience of what I called the lights going off in their eyes. I would see they would get it, and I would go, okay, they got it. Now I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek, because now we have the mechanisms to measure exactly what is going on in the brain. Remember, my girlfriend said that's what I
Brain
wanted to know.
doctor.
Right?
It all comes back to that one point.
And what they know now is that they can measure it now, that when a person has those aha moments, when something clicks for them, um, there's a part about above your right ear. It's called the anterior superior temporal gyrus. It shoots out a blast of gamma waves, which is the highest electrical frequency in the brain, and new neural pathways are created. So you're literally changing your brain.
Oh my goodness.
So that for me is like really exciting, because it can happen like that.
Mm.
And when in the field that I'm working in, sometimes when things can happen quickly, if someone has been frustrated or overwhelmed, that's a really good thing.
Yes.
So I started using the stories because I saw it was working. And then now they have the science to show why it works, which fascinates me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really interesting to know. And yeah, no, I think that's amazing. With the neuroscience side of things, what got you interested in that? Like, was obviously your upbringing and that moment as a 3-year-old saying you wanted to be a brain doctor.
Yeah, I remember in graduate school when we had a course in neuroscience, and I was a little fascinated, but once again, the sciences were taught in ways that were really hard for me to grasp. But as soon as I discovered the story element, then I could get all excited. And so I was able to read people who wrote about the neuroscience in story form, and I was hooked. It was like, oh, I got now I got the neural
Yeah, the
pathways
gamma
being
rays.
used in my brain.
You had an aha moment.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess that brings us to your best-selling book, Eating in the Light of the Moon, rather. And I guess for our listeners out there who aren't sure what that is, I feel like you're going to be the best person to explain it and do it the most justice that it deserves. Would you mind explaining what that book is and what it's about and what brought you to writing it?
Yeah, it's a collection of folk tales and fairy tales from around the world that I use to describe the issues that underlie disordered eating, the things that you can't really see with your eyes in your head, but you can see with your inner sight, your insight. And so using story, it actually gets you into a different part of your brain where you can see connections between things that appear initially to be unrelated. So most folks struggling with disordered eating think that the disordered eating has its own little orbit, right? It's like,
Mm.
here's my life, and then I have this thing over here. And they don't understand that it's all interconnected and it's all related. And recovery means finding those connections so you can disconnect.
Mm.
And so I found storytelling was a way to help people see these things that initially didn't seem to have any relationship at all. But then when you start working with stories, you start to see the patterns. And so when you see the patterns, whole worlds open up. So, for example, if someone is restricting their food, that's not the only thing they're restricting. They're restricting new experiences. They're restricting their emotions. They're restricting intimacy. They're putting themselves on restriction if they make a mistake. So you see this theme of restriction throughout their entire life. Now, the food restriction gets our attention because it can be deadly. But once you start to see the pattern, then you can really get the bigger picture. Someone who struggles with bulimia or yo-yo dieting, um, what you'll see in the rest of their life is this pattern of taking on too much too quickly, not being able to assimilate, and have to get rid of it. So they'll sign up for a whole bunch of classes in school and get overwhelmed and drop out. Or they'll meet someone, fall madly in love, and as soon as they see a flaw, it's over. Or they'll start a bunch of projects and it gets to be too much and they drop them all. Or they'll meet someone and become best friends, and when there's a conflict, they ghost them. So this pattern, when you start to see the pattern, it really helps you see where the real issues lie. And someone who struggles with binge eating or overeating, you're going to find this theme of scarcity everywhere. It's not just there's not enough food, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, there's not enough attention, or maybe they feel like they're not enough.
Yes.
So now that tells you, where the work lies.
Wow, that's amazing. And look, obviously, as someone that works in that space, you do obviously work with such a wide range, rather, of different clients. But when you really put it in those terms, it's so, I don't know, I'm just thinking of so many different clients and thinking of their life experiences, and all the dots are connecting. It's really, really interesting. And
Yeah.
like with the book writing process, I'm interested to know, like, how long did that take you? What did that process look like?
It's usually a
10
journey, isn't it?
years.
Yeah.
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 10
It
years.
took 10 years to write the book.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I had a practice, I had children, and so I dedicated one day out of the week to write the book. And it was an interesting journey because there's a technique that I teach my clients that actually allowed me to write the book. And the technique is about balancing the masculine and feminine principles within all of us. And I'm not speaking in terms of gender, even though it sounds like I am. They use this language because I trained in the Jungian tradition, and the masculine principle shows up in dreams, for example, in the form of a male, and the feminine in the form of a female. But we all have, the idea is, and many indigenous cultures work with these two components, we all have these faculties within us. And so the masculine side of ourselves, or the solar side of ourselves, or the yang side of ourselves, is the part that's logical, linear, goal achievement oriented, that loves to check things off the box and get things done, and knows the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? That part of ourselves,
Yes.
which is really valuable. But there's another part that is the feminine, lunar, yin side of ourselves, that is more emotional, intuitive, instinctual, relational, and is interested in the connection between all things. And we live in a culture where these two things are out of balance, right? One side is overvalued and one side is undervalued. And I think that it contributes to eating disorders, but we all internalize that imbalance. So when I was trying to write this book, I would get these ideas, but every single time I sat down to write, nothing would come, like blank, zero, zilch. And I remembered this exercise of learning how to balance these two sides. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And it's a process of listening to the understanding that both have very different values, and just listening. And so when I did this exercise, my more feminine, fun-loving, nature-oriented side said, oh, you've been asking the wrong side to write the book. I'm going to write the book.
Yeah.
And the other side said, oh, no, this is a professional book. You don't even return phone calls as soon as you should. There's no way you're going to write that book. And they were quarreling. But finally, this more lunar side said, look, here's the deal. If you take me windsurfing, when we come back, then you can sit down and you'll be able to write the book. And I thought, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. But this side said, but here's the other thing, don't read what you've written right afterwards. So I thought this was weird, but I was feeling desperate at this point. So I didn't tell anyone, but I went ahead and did it. And I went out, went windsurfing, came back, sat down with a yellow pad and paper and started writing and writing and writing. And it just flowed out. And I didn't read it. I put it away. And then the next time I was ready to work on it, I pulled it out and I read it and I went, oh, this is good. And then I brought in that other side that dotted the I's and crossed the T's, made sure there were no dangling participles, made sure that everything that I said was theoretically sound. I mean, that side would say, Anita, Freud did not say dreams were the unconscious. He said they were the royal road to the unconscious. Get it right.
Jeez,
Correctional.
Nina.
It's like a spell check and a grammar check for yourself.
So I got the two working together, and that's how the book got written. And that's why it's fairy tales and folk tales, but the underpinnings are very solid, very evidence-based.
Wow, that's amazing. And that sounds very, very similar to, I think it's Hemingway's like Write Drunk, Edit Sober. Like whenever I write a
Oh,
blog
yeah,
post or anything, I always just do it's quite similar to
yeah,
that. I just
exactly.
pump it out,
Yeah.
go away, look at it the next day, and then, cross the T's, dot the I's.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
that's amazing. And I think, letting that sort of inner child or that feminine side, do what it wants to
Mhm,
do,
mhm,
or that masculine side or that, more, I guess, academic side to really come out.
mhm, mhm.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, writing a book 10 years. It's a
That's-
long time, but it's also good things take a lot of time, don't they? Like it takes
They
time
do.
to produce something like that has a lot of nuggets in it.
Yeah, no short feet at all. And with the
Mhm.
publishing process, was that, quite smooth? How long has it been out now, if you
Oh,
don't mind me
no,
asking?
that was no, that was that was people had told me, they said, "Oh, Anita, writing the book is the easiest part. The
Right.
publishing is the hardest." And I thought, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And oh no, I went through, oh my gosh. So, when I first was getting it published, my agent said, "Oh my gosh, everyone is interested. There's 20 publishers, blah, blah, blah." And then one after another, they said, "No, no, 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 thank you, no."
Mm.
And so I thought, okay. And then she said, "Wait a minute, there is one publisher that I'm going to try." And they agreed to do it. And they were, um, I have to say they may not have been the most reputable, but what do you do? I just went, I knew nothing. The agent was in New York City. I was in Hawaii. I said, okay. And then what happened is they stopped. People were asking for the book and nobody could get the book because they weren't putting it out. I would go speak at conferences and people would come out of the conference and they'd go to buy the book and they say, "We can't get the book."
Mm.
So I'd say to the publisher, "Why can't people get the book?" And then I saw in my contract that if it's not if it's not available over X period of time, I get the rights back. So it was a big ordeal. I had to fight to get the rights back.
Mm.
But I had another publisher waiting in the wings that said, "If you get the rights back,
Let me know.
we would like it."
Wow.
So over the years, it's been published in different languages, but it's been not smooth.
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound
Sounds like a very
very-
up and down. It sounds like almost takes just as long as writing the book to actually get the publishing side of things
Oh.
right?
Well, things have changed a lot. Nowadays, self-publishing is a thing
Yes.
that's way more readily available.
Mm,
And
mm.
so, but back then that wasn't the case.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, no short feet, but it's amazing and it's a brilliant book. So coming back to the diet culture thing, obviously earlier you explained what diet culture was, and I guess it was really important that we explored your power of storytelling and how you do really harness that in the work that you do. With diet culture, how would you, and I know it's quite a lengthy topic, but in a nutshell, how would you define how diet culture does impact our society?
Well, I think it just tells people that the way they are, just the way they are, is not okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, it pervades everything, and the messages are quite subtle. And actually, I would say the approach that is used is storytelling in its most subtle, but I would have to say sinister form.
Yeah.
So that the messages we get these images all the time that tell a story about, what we should or shouldn't be eating, how we should look, and all of that. And so that's why I like to fight story with story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never really thought about it like that, but you're right. Like so much of the time we're finding things out through the use of story, and you might watch something online and it's depicted in a particular way, but yeah,
Mhm.
I never really thought about that concept of it being like its own sinister aha moment through that story that these
Yeah.
things are actually generated and
Yeah.
driven through.
Yeah, I can tell you, here's a story that I use to fight story, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of go up against diet culture and all those messages, because people who struggle with disordered eating, it's a David and Goliath kind of situation. I
Mm.
mean, you're dealing with a pretty big force So the story is that there is once this nightingale who is in the forest, and she's singing and singing and singing, and she's enjoying the sound of her voice reverberating through the treetops. And along comes a crow, and the crow says, "Oh my gosh, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. Could you cut that racket out? You're polluting the whole forest." And the nightingale said, "Oh, no, no, we nightingales, we're known for our beautiful song." And the crow says, "I don't think so. That's the worst thing I've ever heard." And they start fighting. And along comes a pig, and the pig hears them quarreling. And the pig says, look, why don't we just end this once and for all? Why don't we have a contest? I'll be the judge, and then you guys can stop the quarrel. And so they agreed. And the nightingale sang her song, and the crow cawed, and the pig immediately declared the crow the winner. And the nightingale burst into tears. And the crow said, "Look at you. Not only are you a lousy singer, but you're a terrible loser." And the nightingale said, I'm not crying because I lost. I'm crying because a pig was my judge." What do pigs know about music? This isn't a diss on pigs. I have to tell you. But the point is, consider the source.
Yeah.
Always consider the source. So for people that need to understand diet culture, they need to really look at who's to gain from these messages, right? Because there's a lot of people making a lot of money over you feeling bad about the way you look, and therefore you need to purchase this diet plan or have this plastic surgery or maybe these cosmetics, or the list goes on and on and on. And so I think considering the source is a really valuable tool for someone who's struggling, when you realize, all right, where is this message coming from and who is to benefit from it, rather than just accepting it as the truth.
That media literacy can be really invaluable in that situation, rather. And I think it really comes back to what you were saying about sinister storytelling, right? Like, yes, they're selling the diet, but they're portraying it as live a happier and healthier life and be the most confident version of yourself. And it's quite evil.
Well, it's even in the language, right? We talk about good foods and bad foods, and now even the term healthy has been co-opted, right? So if someone is struggling with an eating disorder and someone says, "Oh, you look so healthy,"
Ugh,
the way they hear that
the worst thing to
is
say.
exactly right. So it's all kind of embedded in the language as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and the way the language is spoken too, right?
So it sounds like you really use those other narratives, like the one that you just gave around the nightingale, to combat, someone's experiences of diet culture or disordered eating.
Yeah, and also not to think about, okay, so you've hated your thighs your whole life. How come? Well, your older brother used to tease you about your thighs. Okay, yeah, he said I had thunder thighs. Okay, how old were you? Oh, I was 11. How old was he? Maybe he was 15. Why would he take any interest at all in the size of your thighs? What's that about? Consider the source. What was going on? Maybe at 11 you were starting to develop. Maybe you were starting to go into puberty. Maybe he doesn't know. At 15, he didn't know how to handle that kind of stuff. So the best he could do was put it down because he felt threatened. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like you can go on and on and on and on when you start looking at, well, wait a minute. Why would somebody else take an interest in your body? And why would they want to criticize you? What might be going on with them? And you can start to see this has nothing to do with you. It has to do with their own fears, their own projections, their own struggles. So, it's really important to look a little deeper rather than just to accept that, oh, they said blah, blah, blah. So that must mean that I'm blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you find that a lot of the connecting the dots tends to lead back to people's past as well, in terms of where a lot of this stuff really stems from?
Oh yeah, I mean, for all of us are living from our past,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Everything we do has been influenced by past experiences. But going back to Viktor Frankl, you see, what's most important is the meaning you give to that experience.
Mm,
So you can't change what happened to you in the past, but you absolutely can change the meaning you give to it, and therein lies your freedom, just as he said.
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, the reframing of it all, hey?
And if
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
isn't necessarily like in an eating disorder treatment or doesn't, I
Mhm.
guess, have the resources available to sort of seek that one-on-one support or group support, do you have any tips or advice for our listeners on how they can start moving away from diet culture? Because let's be honest, it's freaking everywhere.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think there's a twofold path, and one as a dietitian you're probably quite familiar with, and that is cultivating interoceptive awareness, and that's just a big term to talk about um, your inner experience of your body. And so, for example, when you say, my head is pounding, my heart is racing, my stomach is growling, that's interoceptive awareness. And the more you develop that, awareness of the signals from your body, especially around eating, whether it's hunger and fullness. But what all the research has shown is that that gets you back in your body, and that substantially reduces struggles with body image, for example.
Yes.
So learning what's the physical sensation of hunger, and where in your body do you feel it when it's a whisper, not a shout?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what's the physical sensation of fullness? And where in your body do you feel it? And we all have these, many of us have been taught to disregard them because we've been taught to become a member of the Clean Plate Club, or those poor children starving in China, Bangladesh, whatever your
You're
generation
literally
happens to
having
be.
flashbacks.
Mm,
But then you're tapping into your own body guidance, and it's there.
Yes.
It hasn't gone anywhere. And so I think that's a really good thing to do. I suggest a simple approach is that whenever you reach for something to eat, ask yourself, am I still hungry? If the answer is yes, how do I know? And then you look for a physical sensation. Not, I feel like pizza. That's not a physical sensation, right? We're looking for a contraction or an expansion or a heaviness, a lightness, roughness, smoothness, hollowness, some sensation, because
mm,
that's the interoceptive awareness. And the same with fullness. And what people can do is they can take 2 bites at a time, check in, am I still hungry? If the answer is yes, say, how do I know? Look for a sensation, have 2 more bites, and just go 2 bites at a time.
mm.
And this is the way you strengthen that connection to your body's wisdom. So that's one thing that I think anyone can do.
That's amazing that that inner attunement is, a really crucial part of recovery. And I don't know, I feel like I know the answer, but I am just going to ask anyway, if that's okay. If somebody that you're working with is quite undernourished and might need to ignore that inner attunement, I don't know, how do you go about that? Because I think I absolutely agree with you, and that really tuning into your body's cues and your body's wisdom is so invaluable
Yeah.
and so important. But is there a time that you consider that that might not be the priority?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. If someone is in the throes of an eating disorder, it's very difficult to do it by yourself.
Yes.
Mm,
So, I think there are things that you can do, and if you're dealing with disordered eating, it's a little easier. But going back to the food restriction, so someone there might want to take a look at, if they're restricting their food, to really explore what are the other areas in their life. Are they restricting their voice? They're not speaking up. Are they, so they're restricting their words? Are they restricting their feelings? They're not letting themselves feel it. I mean, so that is something that they can start to look at as to
Yeah.
what's really going on.
So that part of their inner wisdom, not so much the physical cues at that point in time, but more that inner wisdom of
Right.
like, how is the restriction showing up elsewhere?
mm,
Right. Well, the cool thing about this is, and for me, it's the most fun part, because the foods you struggle with are going to show you exactly what that is. So if you can imagine a metaphor, two tanks, we're going to call them tank A and tank B. Tank A is the tank you fill when you need physical nourishment. You fill it with food. Tank B is the tank that you fill when you have other kinds of hungers. These are the non-visible, the non-physical hungers. But most people don't know this. They think we have one tank.
Yes.
And so before we know it, tank A is full and overflowing, but we're still hungry.
Yeah.
Or we don't even want to get close to tank A because it seems like the bottomless pit and it'll never get filled. And that's the restricting part. And so what has to happen is you tease the two tanks apart. And how do you do that? Interoceptive awareness, right?
Right.
Once you can learn your hunger and satiety signals, and let's say you're reaching for the pizza and you learn how to check in, there's not a hunger signal in sight, but you still want to eat that pizza. Well, guess what?
Tank
You've
B.
now tumbled down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole and you're in tank B.
Yes.
And in tank B, pizza's not pizza.
Yeah.
Food isn't food. What is it? It's a concrete physical symbol of another kind of hunger that you're experiencing and probably don't even know about. So that's when the fun begins, because the food is talking to you, but it's talking to you in metaphor. It's talking to you in code. And if you can crack the code, a whole new universe opens up for you. And so, I can share a little bit about how to crack that code if you like.
Oh
Absolutely.
yeah, please.
I'm all
I'm
ears.
engaged. I'm glued.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're going to love this one because it relates to your podcast. So, sweet foods. And this has to do if it's a craving for or a fear of. Sweet foods usually have to do with either feeling like there's not enough sweetness in your life or you're not sweet enough. So think of the way in which we use sweet, like where's the sweet spot?
Thank you. Thank you.
Plug.
Right?
Shameless
Or,
plug.
oh, that's such a sweet thing to do. Or he's my sweetheart, right? So we use that word sweet. We might go, whoa, sweet. What does that mean to you? And so that when you start to crack the code, you can start to see what those real hungers are.
Right.
Crunchy, salty foods are usually connected with unexpressed anger and frustration. You want to bite someone's head off, right? Warm foods typically are associated with a craving for emotional warmth. Spicy foods, and again, we're talking either a craving or a fear of, have to do typically with excitement, stimulation, and change. And chocolate, we know this from Valentine's Day, right? Romance, love, sensuality, sexuality. And so when you start to look at the foods you're struggling with through this metaphoric lens, it's amazing what you discover.
Yeah, I love that so much. And it's funny that you said the sweet spot. When we actually rebranded last year, I just had this moment of sitting so on the fence because obviously the people that I work with and support through Sweet Spot, I was like, it's so jarring. People are either going to have such a, affliction for it or be really, really turned off it.
Yeah. But again, once you start to see that, because what are you talking about? Well, who doesn't want the sweet spot, right? That's equanimity, that's balance. It's like it's just enough, not too much of anything, not too little of anything.
Yeah.
And so, you can start to see it really does carry meaning for us. I remember I was sitting with a patient in Aipono, the residential facility on Maui, and she could not eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. She was so disgusted with them. And so I said, so one of the things I do with the patients there is I play with their food, right? And so I said, so describe, the sandwich to me that you can't stand, that you think is so disgusting. And she goes, well, that the jelly is super sickeningly sweet. And the peanut butter is so sticky and it's all mushed together with two pieces of bread. And when she was describing it, the light went off in her because she realized she was describing her parents' relationship and how her mother was cloyingly sweet and her father was overprotective, and she was caught between the two. So it's like you start to see these things because you're using a different part of your brain. You're using the right side of your brain that can see these connections between things that appear to be unrelated. Like, what does a peanut butter and jelly sandwich have to do with your parents and your eating disorder? Well, a lot. So you can start to tap into that. I had a client once, and she was struggling with bulimia. And I said, okay, if there were one food that you could eat with no consequences, zero consequences, what would that be? And she said, oh, vanilla ice cream with strawberries on top. And I said, okay, I want you to imagine I've never had vanilla ice cream with strawberries on top. And you tell me what's so wonderful about it. And she said, it's sweet, it's smooth, and it's refreshing. And when we took a look at what was going on in her life at that point in time, her boyfriend was accusing her of not being sweet enough. She'd just hit a rough patch with her parents that she was desperately wanting to smooth out. And she was in a dead-end job in need of a refreshing change.
Oh my gosh.
All of that in the one food. So it's really, it's pretty powerful when you start using that side of your brain to look at what's really going on, what's beneath the surface.
Isn't it fascinating that our brains come up with all of these connections, subconsciously to cope with whatever's going on in our lives?
Exactly. It's so clever when you think about it. I mean, the brilliance. And that's why understanding that the disordered eating has served a function. It's there to try to help you. It's like a bad friend, right? It's like
helping you in
your
the wrong
stupid
way
friend.
kind of thing.
It tells you the stupid things to do, but hey, if it's the only friend you got, then you're just listening. And so, for many people, that's the log story, is that it has saved them from some very difficult situations. But it's important to understand in what way and how come, because if you want to, you can't just get rid of it unless you find out what his job is. So once you find out what his job is, then you can put it out of a job.
Yes, exactly. When it comes to, creating these metaphors and stories, I'm pretty interested to know what the process looks like for you. Like, is it something that you are constantly thinking about and kind of pop down little notes when they come to mind? Or do you have a session where you sit down and really try and come up with something and edit and refine it? Or
Yeah, I can't help myself. Sometimes I see pictures, like I'll get images, but but mostly what I'm doing is I'm listening to where the energy is on someone's words, because that kind of gets my attention, and it has me, okay, let's look at that word. Like, oh, here's one. So this client of mine, I was working with her remotely. She was living in London, and she was always late. I would get texts saying, I'm on my way, I'm on the train, I'm almost there. And she'd come into the Zoom session, right? Her hair is flying because she's late. And so she came in once and she said, oh, she was so upset. She goes, I binged last night. And I said, oh, good. Because it was just the day before. Let's unpack it. I said, what was going on that day? Was it a stressful day? She goes, oh, yeah. It was the most stressful. She worked for a job that was a startup, and they were doing a crowdfunding. And if they didn't make their goal, the company was going to fold. Right. So I said, oh, yeah, I guess that's stressful. And I said, well, did you make your goal? And she said, yeah, but we didn't know at first. And I said, so what do you binge on? She goes, well, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I just eat different things, but I put ketchup on everything. I said, okay. So I said, so let's go back to what happened that day. So you did make the goal. Did you know that when you binge? She goes, no. And I said, so then afterwards, once you made your goal, you guys found out, did you have a celebration? He goes, oh, no. My boss said, oh, no, we're behind in so much stuff. We just got to catch up. And I said, catch up.
Oh, wow.
Interesting. The penny drops.
That is mind blowing.
Her whole life was trying to catch up. She was always late. She was always, And so that was the pattern that we really needed to look at.
Wow.
That's so interesting. I really find
Isn't
it
it?
fascinating looking at it from that angle. And look, obviously that is to an extent what I do with clients in sessions, but not to that depth. I think that's really beautiful.
Well, if any of your listeners want, they can download a PDF that walks them through how to do this just for fun, just to
Yeah.
see if they want to see what their foods might mean. And they just can go to lightofthemooncafe.com/SSH.
Amazing.
For sweet spot
Health.
health.
I was like, that acronym sounds
Hang on a
fantastic.
second. Yeah, we might pop the link in the show notes for everyone as well, so that they can just kind of log on and click.
Oh,
Should
that's
be
very
nice.
kind of you, Anita. Thank you.
But it makes it fun. You see, struggling with disordered eating can be really debilitating,
Mm.
and really people feel so much despair and hopelessness and helplessness. So when you learn how to play with your food in this way, it brings it enlightens things, not just in terms of illumination, but also in terms of levity. You lighten up, you start to see, because when that thing goes off in your brain, it's funny.
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know why, but it's funny.
Yeah, it removes that element of shame around it, I imagine.
Mhm, mhm.
When it comes to diet culture and supporting people living with disordered eating or eating disorders, do you have any sort of hopes or aspirations for the future of what that looks like? That's quite a loaded
Well,
question.
yeah. No, I think the what I really believe is that the recovery journey from disordered eating is a path to greater consciousness. And I believe that our whole world is trying to evolve in that way. And I happen to believe this with every bone in my body, that those who are struggling and get on the path are leading the way. Now, how long it's going to take, who knows? But I think it's important to recognize there's something bigger afoot, and the struggle in and of itself, because it's this process of learning how to tune in to your body, to your emotions, to your intuition, to claim your authentic self. I mean, that's the path to greater consciousness. And so I feel, I'm ever the optimist, I feel hopeful that, as more and more people get on this path and are able to speak the truth clearly and honestly and kindly, that's where we're headed. So when someone is in the throes of struggling with, feeling horrible about their body because of the messages they've been given, and they choose to say, okay, I'm going to look a little deeper and I'm going to find the meaning in it for me that frees them of that, I think it does start to spread.
Yeah, and it's that community drive as well, isn't it? You know, people talking about it and crashing down and breaking some of those stigmas as well is really important. So.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if someone if someone said to you, "Oh my gosh, look at that belly of yours," you'd say, and you were able to say, "Yeah, look at it."
Yeah.
How can someone shame you if you're not ashamed of it yourself?
Exactly. Exactly. You know, thinking back to toddlers or children as well, like when they've got that little cute little belly, like they don't care. They've
Yeah.
got not a care in the world about it.
Yeah. And I like to remind clients of that. You weren't born with these beliefs about your body.
Yeah.
No. Were you, when you were a little baby, were you kicking your legs to try to get a thigh gap?
No.
And were you worried about the folds in your skin? No.
Yeah.
So where did that come from?
Mm.
Again, consider the source. You weren't born with it. It's not yours.
Anita, this has been amazing. I honestly, my mind is like, as someone that does work in this space, just sort of hearing someone with such, a vast, rather professional experience and, your collections of stories and experiences, it's really, really helpful to know.
Yeah, and I think even like not working in the disordered eating space myself, it's just really sent me into like a spot, like a reflection on where I'm actually at with a lot of this stuff, because I think it is something that we don't do very often, just take a few moments to actually reflect on where, like you said before, where we are as people as well. So
Yeah.
It's not an us and them thing. It's not like, oh, there's these weird people with eating disorders and then there's the rest of us. No, we all use food for non-physical reasons.
mm,
And so we can all learn something from that. I mean, I remember when I was in graduate school, I would be opening the door to the fridge all the time. Was I hungry? No. What was I feeling? Performance anxiety. I was worried about not being able to write this paper or pass this test, and I didn't want to feel those feelings. So I kept going to the fridge trying to convince myself really I was hungry when I wasn't at all.
Yes.
And so I think that's the case for all of us.
mhm,
And so when you can start to see that whenever, if it becomes a pattern that's starting to get out of hand, that's simply a signal saying, okay, there's something going on here. There's a feeling that you're trying not to feel.
mm,
And, it's pointing you towards something that needs to be addressed.
yeah,
That's
great.
brilliant. And aside from your website, which we will pop in the show notes with the /SSH, where can our listeners find you and, learn more about you if they so want to?
Okay. So they can find me at lightofthemooncafe.com. And they can find me. I have another website, dranitajohnston.com. And then I have my clinic in Hawaii, which is ipono, AIPONO.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook.
Amazing. And we'll pop all of these in the show notes, but that's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you again. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of it for today, but very, very grateful to have you on board. And I know that our listeners in particular as well, like my clients and my community at Sweet Spot, will find this such a valuable talk.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm so happy I got to come to the Sweet Spot.
Oh, thank you, Anita.
And have you got dinner lined up for after this?
Oh, yes.
No, I ate before.
Oh,
Oh,
lovely,
smart. Nice
lovely.
move.
Very
nice move.
smart. Well, thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your night, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thanks,
It was
Anita.
nice talking with you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast.
Be the first to know when the next episode drops by hitting subscribe on wherever you catch your podcasts.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at we don't know yet.pod.
See ya.